In this tutorial, you'll learn how to export a Salesforce report in Excel using Salesforce REST API in Python. Now, in Salesforce, a report is essentially a SOQL query output. And by automating your reporting process, you can streamline your workflow more efficiently and eliminating manual work to avoid any mistakes. All right, so first you want to navigate to your Salesforce homepage. Then you want to click on Setup. On the left-hand side, you want to search for Apps. Now under Build, Create, and click on Apps. Under the Connected Apps, you want to create a new app here. A connected app in Salesforce is basically a tool for integrating external applications with Salesforce using APIs and OAuth for secure access. Now right here, we need to give the app a name. And I'll name the app SFDC REST API Connector. Let me make this as Salesforce. So Salesforce REST API Connector. Then click on Tab to populate the API name. And for the contact email, enter your email address. Now here, make sure that you check Enable OAuth settings. And for the callback URL, if you are building a web app, then you need to provide the URL link for the callback. But if you are using this for local development, we'll simply use the localhost.com as the endpoint. Now for the scopes, a scope is essentially a permission set that you want to assign to the application. For demonstration purpose, I'm going to use for access to give this app full permission to do everything. And that's everything we need to do on this page. Now scroll down and save the app. Now here we need to click on continue. Just keep in mind that the change may take up to 10 minutes to go live. On the Connect App detail page, I'm going to click on Manage. Then click on Edit Policies. So by default, if we look at the IP relaxation field, now this field is set to enforce IP restrictions. And what that means is that only IP is added to the saved list will be able to access the API. And I want to change this to relax IP restriction for activated devices. And the reason why is because if you are working remotely and if you are using VPN or if you are working in a coffee shop, then most likely your IP address is not going to be on the saved list. Now go ahead and save the setting. Now go back to the custom apps page. Right, so let's go back to the app details page. Now we can go ahead and click on Manage Consumer Details. And we're going to generate the API access token. Now on the consumer page, you're going to see two sets of IDs. One is the consumer key, and the other one is going to be the consumer secret. I'm going to copy both credentials. Actually, not credentials. I'm going to copy both consumer key and consumer secret to a notepad. Now, Salesforce doesn't offer the regenerate key option. So in that case, if you need to regenerate the consumer key and consumer secret, then we need to create a new connected app from scratch. And once we have the consumer key and consumer secret, we can now dive into the Python script development. Now, to work with Salesforce REST API, I'll be installing three libraries. The first one is going to be HTTPX. This library is used to make request codes or API codes. You can also use requests. And to manage the data set, I'm actually going to use pandas. And to save consumer key and consumer secret, I'm going to use python.env module. And once the packages are installed, let's go ahead and create the Python file. And I'll name the script query .py. And also create .env file to save my environment variables. Oh, I just realized something. My current directory is not in the project folder. Let me open a new terminal. And make sure that I install the packages. Okay. All right, let's do this. Let me go ahead and reinstall the packages. Now I'm going to launch my VS Code here. Now for the env file, you want to create 4 keys: consumer key, consumer secret, your username, and password. So these 4 properties represent your environment variables. Now instead of saving the environment variables in the system, we can save that into this .env file. Now because my username environment variable is already being used, so I'm going to name this to sfdc username, sfdc password. Then simply assign the username, password, consumer key, consumer secret from Salesforce to those 4 properties. All right, so let's import the Python packages. To load the environment variables, we're going to use the OS module. And to make the API calls, we're going to use httpx followed by pandas. And from .env, we're going to import the load.env function to load the environment variables from the .env file. All right, so here let's go ahead and so let's do this. I'll go to line by line so that way that you know the whole entire workflow. So first I'm going to run the load.env function to load my environment variables from the .env file. Then from os.getEnv, we're going to pass the environment variable keys to load each value individually. So here we have consumer key, consumer secret username, and password that you use to log into your account. Now, if we look at my Salesforce domain here, it's a custom domain. Now, if you're using a custom domain, then you will need to create a variable and assign the custom domain address. But if not, then you can simply set the domain variable value to login or test if you're using a sandbox. Then we need to construct the authorization URL, and it's going to be your domain name followed by /services/OAuth2/token. And make sure that you set the beginning to HTTPS. Then we need to create a dictionary to pass the consumer key, consumer secret, username, and password. And for the grant type, you need to set that to password. Now we need to create the access token to authenticate our access. So here, let's do this. I'm going to run this code block here to create my variables. And here we need to make a post request. We need to pass the auth URL that looks like this, followed by the credentials data to pass to the authorization URL. So if I run the post request, and I'll print the response object. Now, if everything provided is correct, then it's going to return the status code 200. Then we can print the JSON output that contains the access token right here and the instant URL, which is going to be identical to the domain URL here. Now let me go ahead and create these 2 variables. And we can also insert a check. We can say If access token is not available or is empty, then want to raise an exception, authentication fail. Otherwise, we can prepare the variables to make a request code to run SOQL query using REST API. So here we need to create a header. We are passing the access token, and for the content type, it's going to be application JSON. And for the query endpoint, let me grab the link. And I'll post a link in the description below. So right here, this URI here is the endpoint to connect to the query service. And right now I'm using 360.0 version for the endpoint. Now we can create a SOQL query variable to run the report. Now assuming that this SOQL query is going to be my report. And because if we go back to the documentation, when a SOQL query is executed, only up to 2,000 records can be written at a time. So that means that if our report has more than 2,000 records, then we need to run additional API calls to fetch those additional records. And to do that, it's actually not too difficult. So first, I'm going to create an empty list to store the records. Then I'm going to insert a while loop to check if the query endpoint is not empty. So let me put the query endpoint here. Now from here, we're going to make a GET request to the endpoint. Then we're going to supply the headers, and we'll pass our SOQL query to the params parameter. And if we look at the documentation, the parameter is called Q. So we'll pass the Q parameter followed by the SOQL query. And we go ahead and create these two variables. So this is going to be the SOQL query endpoint that we're going to connect to. Then we're going to pass the headers to authenticate our access. Then we're going to pass the SOQL query. Now, if I go ahead and run the GET request and I'll run the if statement, it looks like I'm not running into any exception. So that means that the API code is a success. Now, to get the report records or report data, if I run response.json, it's going to return this dictionary object. And from the dictionary object, there's a key code records. So right here, from the response.json output, we have total size. And the dump property is actually a pretty important field. If the value is false, then that means that the additional records are not getting retrieved. In that case, you need to reference this next records URL key, which I don't have because my records is fewer than 2,000 rows. But if my record size is 2005, then this key will exist. So here I'm referencing the records key to get the records from the SOQL query into this response JSON object. Then I'm going to pass the records to the records list. Oh, I forgot to create the list. Now, assuming that the next records URL key exists, then we can get the next batch's URL and pass that to the query endpoint URL. Then construct a new query endpoint URL. And I'll go back to the while loop condition. Now, because from this if block, the query endpoint is updated, it's not empty. You'll basically run another GET request to get the next 5 records or 2,000 records until the next records URL does not exist. So let me go ahead and run this code block. Now, if I print len records, and that will return 32 rows of records. And to save the report as an Excel file, using pd.json normalize function, we can pass the records to create the normalized data frame data set. Now let me create the data frame. And let's go ahead and export this to an Excel file. And let's do Excel report.excel sx. I'm going to set the index to false. And here I need to install OpenPyExcel Python package. And this is one of the Excel libraries that Pandas uses to work with Excel applications. Now let me run this function again. And that will create the Excel reports Excel file. Now if we open the Excel file, and here's what the reports looks like. I mean, it's not too bad, but there are a couple unnecessary columns that we don't want in the Excel report. So we have a whole bunch of attribute types of columns. And to get rid of those columns, I have this method here. So basically, I'm going to filter the columns where the keyword attributes is in the column name. Then I'm going to convert the output as a list. Then from df.columns.drop, I'm going to drop those columns to give me the column names that does not contain the keyword attributes. Then I'll select those non-attribute columns. And let's name this to df2. Then I can go ahead and create my final Excel report, which is going to be Salesforce report. And if we look at the new report or new Excel file, we now have a more clean Excel report that we can present to the management or give to someone else. And you can also run summarize reports as well. So for example, now let's say I have this select count from project C. So this will return the project count by project name. Now, because we know in SOQL, you cannot rename a column, but in Pandas, we can rename a column pretty easily. So I'm going to reference the columns attribute. So let's do df. Let's just do df. And this would be project count and project name. And I'll close both Excel files. Now this time I'm going to terminate all the sessions and I'll run the script from scratch. Oh, and that seems to return 3 columns. So let's take a look. Okay, so here, because I didn't include the this attribute exclusion condition, so it's returning all the counts, including the attributes type count. But if we look at the Excel report, and this is exactly what we want. And the good thing is, now instead of paying a bunch of money to third-party services that may cost you $49 per month, $100 per month, and all these services that actually most of them you may not even need it. These features are all down to Salesforce API. So by looking at different use cases, then you can come up with your own customized solutions using Salesforce REST API. Now, this concludes this tutorial. And feel free to post your question or your feedback in the comment section below. And I'll see you guys in the next video.